Hour, so we are going to get started. It is so great to see everyone here. And Dan, if you're all right as we get going to let others in from the breakout room, from the waiting room, that'd be great. We are so honored to have time together and obviously share tonight's wonderful launch party for CCL's Nerd Corner. In the chat, we just put a link to where you can join us along with our presentation tonight. And if it's all right, we'd also love to hear where you're calling in from, what brought you to tonight's workshop launch party, and anything that you want to make sure that Dana and Jonathan and Rick can speak to. Start inundating the chat and let us know all about who you are and why you are here. And you may notice that I do a very poor job of filling in for Dr. Danny Richter. But he unfortunately is dealing with a bout of COVID at the moment. So I'm happy here to play substitute. And obviously we'll still be hearing from Danny tonight because he is with us in spirit and was a big part of really envisioning having this launch.
If anyone, Brett, I should just say, if anyone has come to this launch party for the champagne, we're sorry to disappoint. But
yes, we did not bring champagne, but you are more than welcome to use your own. And at the same time, let's do a little quick housekeeping for those that are joining us on the Zoom end of things. We are also live streaming to our CCL YouTube channel. So to hello all of our listeners on that side of things, you're more than welcome to still type anything in the YouTube live stream and I'll monitor that and get us all connected there too. But in the meantime, please feel free to follow along with us. You can raise a toast to give us a thumbs up, a round of applause, a heart, whatever you want with this little reactions button on the bottom as we celebrate tonight's launch of Nerd Corner. If you have questions again on the Zoom side of things, click on that little chat bubble icon, type in anything that you'd like. We'd love to see your smiling face, so feel free to toggle on your video or off as you wish so that we can stay connected in this era of social distance. And when we get to Q&A, which there will be plenty of, feel free to also click on that little mute icon and we'll be able to unmute you that way to hear you for your questions. It's great to see all the people joining from throughout the larger United States and world. So I've just put a link in the chat a few times where you can follow along with us. But again, here is the Nerd Corner URL in the chat. It's just simply cclusa.org/nerd-corner. And at this point, we'll get this party started. I'm just going to be emceeing things and then passing it largely to our three wonderful research coordinators. But with that, I'd love to just welcome everyone to tonight's launch party. CCL's research team is pleased to announce the launch tonight of its fully operational Nerd Corner. You're going to join our research team of Dana Nuccitelli, Jonathan Marshall, and Rick Knight for this launch event. And the Nerd Corner will be a one-stop shop for nerds, the nerd curious, and anyone interested in engaging with the research team on the latest from the climate science, economics, policy, and technology worlds all rolled into one. And if we've done our job well, our goals for the following launch are going to be highlighting our research department extraordinaires, what they do, who's in it, what expertise they bring to the equation. See what Danny did there? They're also going to have the chance to explore different parts of the Nerd Corner and how you might jump in as a volunteer to engage with our research team. And hopefully while we do so, we'll also have the chance to just have fun and sign up to join in and participate in that discussion. So the first goal, before I'll pass it to our coordinators here, is just highlighting where you can find this on CCL Community. So a quick little review, anywhere you might be on CCL Community, you've got this top navigation menu. And if you click on that connect button, there's a drop-down menu that emerges. And from there, one of those options is action teams. So click on that. And then from there, you'll also see that in this top left area, we have the analysis and impacts section, and Nerd Corner is right in the middle of that. So click on that and you'll be taken right to this team. And the last thing to highlight is, if you haven't already, you'll see in the middle of that blue equation banner in the center of the top, an invitation to join. So click that green join button and make sure that by doing that, you'll stay up to date and can participate in the discussions centered around Nerd Corner. What I'm going to do, though, just in that, obviously, I am happy to be a part of this team, but this really all started with the research team and Danny. I'm actually going to pass it to Danny, who, even though he's not here live, is able to join us virtually today. Just a quick little shout out. We've actually asked everyone featured tonight to provide some fun photos of their background and parts of their lives ahead of CCL. And so here on Danny's slide, you can see him dressed in Antarctica, as the Antarcticans do, in a tuxedo, of course. You can see him at the top of Mount Doom in New Zealand, which was used in The Lord of the Rings. You can see him filtering his diatom cultures in his lab coat. And you can see him inside his bubble on a research cruise off Chile. So with that, let's find out a little bit more about the vision behind Nerd Corner, and I'll let Danny take it from here for a little 3-minute intro.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danny Richter. My favorite Star Trek is The Next Generation, and to be a bit provocative, I actually think that Battlestar Galactica is better than any of the Star Treks. I finally convinced myself of my nerd for life status while losing track of time coding for my PhD thesis in oceanography while also listening to techno music. I first joined CCL as a volunteer in 2008, and I joined staff in 2013. When I started on staff, I was staffer number 5 or 6 in the entire organization, and I was in charge of our government affairs, partnerships and coalitions, international, and most germane for tonight, research departments. In those early days, Mark and Marshall really relied on the fact that I had just graduated with a degree that required a frontline knowledge of the latest climate science from one of the best research institutions in the world. At that institution, Scripps at University of California, San Diego, I took classes from the likes of Ralph Keeling, son of Charles David Keeling of Keeling Curve fame, and Dr. Ramanathan, whose work on black carbon earned him the honor of organizing the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Science conference in 2014, which I had the great fortune to attend. And that conference also preceded the release of Laudato Si. As the only member of the department when I first joined, I had to cover a lot of topics I didn't actually have expertise in, while constantly triaging my other responsibilities. But in just that first year, I referenced and consolidated all of our extant laser talks. I worked with Regional Economic Models Incorporated, or REMI, to produce our REMI study. And I generally indexed and justified all our central political claims so that people could follow the research basis for our advocacy. In the years since that start, we've staffed up. We now have 2 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee, all of whom have experience and expertise that complements my own. CCL's messaging to our volunteers has always acknowledged that people approach complex systems with differing capacities for detail. As we have grown more sophisticated as an organization, we've started to segment out our communications and provide multiple options in terms of level of detail. This, the Nerd Corner, is one place for those that want a lot of detail. With fewer resources, we were concentrated on the message that everybody could understand and process, but in the Nerd Corner, with the launch today, we want to go deeper. I really am sorry that I'm not there with you live tonight. I tested positive this week for COVID, and that is what's keeping me from you this evening, but you are in truly great hands here tonight. I'm sure you're going to love meeting the rest of the CCL research team that we have built to shine a light on the details. And we also want to introduce you to the place where we invite you to shine your light on those details and engage with us in what we hope will be a sort of crowdsourced peer review of what's latest and greatest in science, policy, economics, and technology as it pertains to the goals of CCL. Creating the political will for a livable world and empowering our volunteers remain our central goals, and we hope that this space will be a source for your empowerment and the improvement of how the organization handles and communicates details. Thank you. And again, sorry I couldn't be here with you tonight.
Well, we definitely miss you, Danny. You are with us in spirit, and obviously we're still going to have a good time, even though you are joining us virtually. So let's jump right back into actually getting to know our research team. And obviously we'll start tonight by getting to know the wonderful Dana Nuccitelli. What I'm going to do here to just tee up each of our research coordinators is give a little bit of a background behind them, as well as some of the fun photos that they've submitted, and then do a couple of questions to interview them before they debut several parts of the Nerd Corner each. So beginning with Dana, who joined CCL staff late last year with an expertise in science and impressive credentials as a science journalist, I will pass it to you, Dana, to just walk us through your career before jumping into your work with CCL and how you developed your expertise in science communication.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So I got my bachelor's degree in astrophysics from UC Davis, or UC Berkeley, and then my master's degree from UC Davis in physics, where my advisor was named Matt Richter, who Danny calls Uncle Matt. It's a funny, lucky coincidence of mine that I got to work with two Richters in my career. And then after I got my degree, I got a job as an environmental scientist in the private sector, cleaning up a Superfund site in the Sacramento area, which I did for 15 plus years. And during that time, I kind of started to learn about climate science and climate change, and eventually started writing for skepticalscience.com in 2010. From that work, I got hired on by The Guardian to write for their International Environmental Blogging Network in 2013, which I did for a little over 5 years until they unfortunately shut that down, at which point I started writing for Yale Climate Connections, who I still write for today. So I've been doing lots of writing about climate science and policy and economics and all that good stuff for about 12 years now. And then, as Brett mentioned, I joined the CCL staff last September and been having a good time working with the CCL folks since then.
Well, we have too, and we're certainly lucky to have you as part of the network and team. Dana, would you mind sharing just a little bit more about some of the actual projects that you've taken on that you think are most important, or especially exciting for us, the volunteers tonight that may not have heard about them yet?
Yeah, well, my big project since joining the staff was creating these regional climate impact slide decks that are available on CCL Community. So I went through kind of a bunch of research, mostly using the IPCC report and National Climate Assessment Report, and put together PowerPoint slide decks highlighting the local regional climate impacts in each region of the country, which I'm hoping people will use to give local presentations to engage and inform their local peers and maybe members of Congress and whoever's interested in learning about how climate change is going to impact them locally.
I love it. And I just put a link to that in the chat for anyone to explore if they haven't seen that. Well, why don't you walk us through a little bit about what you are most excited about for Nerd Corner?
Yeah, Nerd Corner is exciting. So probably the thing I'm most excited about is the forum, because we really want to get the volunteers engaged and talking to each other and talking to us, because we've got a lot of smart folks, a lot of different expertise among our volunteers, because we got scientists, we got economists, we got policy wonks, we got folks who are just interested in those subjects and want to talk about them. So we're trying to get some cross-pollination between all those different groups on the Nerd Corner forum. So I'm really excited about that and hope we can get a lot of volunteer engagements, chatting with each other and chatting with us on the Nerd Corner forum. And then the other really fun aspect is we're going to have a chart of the week, which you can see there. It's our first one, which is a chart I put together of different sectors of greenhouse gas emissions for the United States. And then if you click on that, normally it will link to a forum post where we kind of discuss what the chart means and then hopefully have a little discussion about it. This particular one just links to a CCL blog post that I wrote on Electrify Everything that used that particular chart. But from here on out, we're going to have the chart of the week. You click on it and it'll link to a forum post, and then we'll have a nice, fun discussion of our cool chart of the week.
I love that. And any other advice, I guess, that you have, Dana, as we've had discussions around getting Nerd Corner up and launched, on how, especially all of the expertise that our volunteer network brings, can best jump into either those forums or the discussion around chart of the week?
Yeah, I think we want people to jump in head first onto the forum, and we've got a few topics on there that people can engage on. Or, if there's something else you want to talk about, some new bit of news or research or something that's on your mind, then start a new forum post, and let's get chatting. All
right, I think we can take that challenge on. Thank you very much, Dana. And what I'll do next actually is pass it to our wonderful research coordinator, Rick Knight, Rick is part-time in the research department, and part of that is because he was a full-time state coordinator with CCL in Illinois, and is still a group leader active and a state coordinator emeritus. He's been with CCL for the better part of a decade and joined our staff after a career as a chemical engineer. So I'm going to do a little way back time machine here if anyone else wants to join me. And as we go back to 1979 in the land of big computers and bell bottoms, I'll let Rick tell his story from here.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Yeah, these pictures tell you the story of my career in energy research. I got a chemistry degree, a BS chemistry degree from the U of I at Chicago back in 1973, and just right after the Beatles broke up, I guess. And then I worked for 3 years in a couple of industrial labs, but then got interested in energy and went to work in that field at a nonprofit lab in Chicago called the Gas Technology Institute. So while I was there, I also studied chemical engineering at the Illinois Institute of Technology for a couple of years and gradually got more and more involved in the engineering side of things: energy efficiency, industrial combustion, fuel cells, bioenergy, a whole range of things. So I ended up spending 41 years working there at GTI on a wide range of research projects in energy and pollution control. And that gave me broad exposure on the engineering side and to process engineering at all scales, from small lab scale all the way to industrial scale, engineering economics, and even policy at the federal level, because we had to do some lobbying for projects that we were working on with federal funding. I got to learn from some of the smartest people that you've never heard of. And I was really fortunate to have that opportunity. I also had the good fortune to be a co-author on 12 patents while working at GTI. My most satisfying undertaking was managing a $21 million biorefinery pilot plant for the Department of Energy, working with several industrial partners from all around the world, from Finland and Denmark, and from the US as well. But all along, as I learned more and more about these things, about how energy is made and delivered, all the chemistry involved, and the way complex systems work, as Danny mentioned, complex systems like the Earth we live on, I had this growing sense that I had to pay more attention to this thing called climate change. And when I read a book by Dr. Jim Hansen back in 2010, that kind of sealed the deal. So I was looking for something else to do beyond just working on these projects. So that's when I discovered CCL. And back in 2012, I started volunteering with CCL. I started a group in Chicago, and at that time, there was only one chapter in Chicago. Now there's, I think, 16. In 2016, I retired from GTI as an institute engineer and eventually weaseled my way onto the CCL staff as part of the research team in 2018. So I've been working as a part-time contractor for Danny Richter since then. And that's where I'll stop.
Well, thank you, Rick, obviously, for that background and really reviewing, again, your engineering expertise and your whole career as a chemical engineer. A couple of things, I guess, that we're curious about here tonight. What are some of the projects that you've taken on that you think would be important? Same question that I asked Dana.
Yeah, the first thing that I did that I continue to do is overhauling and managing the laser talks, which had become out of date, and it was very, very difficult to keep them up to date. So somebody had to take that on. So I've been doing that. I continue to update those regularly. I made a close technical review of the Energy Innovation Act when it was first drafted and provided some input to the sponsoring office that was later incorporated into the text. I worked closely with data analyst Kevin Ummel on the 2020 Household Impact Study and drafting the FAQ and summary for that study to go on our web pages. I also worked with the IT department developing a personal carbon dividend calculator that is linked to the household impact study. So people could estimate how their family finances would do under the EICDA policy. I did an analysis of the 2018 IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees C, did some presentations at CCL conferences on that, focusing on the carbon pricing part of the report. I prepared and give presentations on science and policy topics at CCL conferences and at Citizens Climate University sessions, and fielding a lot of technical questions from CCL volunteers, policy questions as well. So those are things that I've been involved in.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot of free time, Rick. I mean, I don't know what else you've been doing. But seriously, any of ththose links that Rick's just talked about, we put in the chat here with the whole research team. Obviously, I don't think CCL would have had the success, impact, or relative influence that we've had without all of that yeoman's work. Rick, what I'm going to do actually is just go to the actual pages that you wanted to highlight. I know that the question that you are most excited about is really exploring some of the resources that we have compiled together.
Right. These are resources that we've had for some time in the CCL internet world, but we're kind of gathering them all together so that they're easier to find for those who are nerd curious and want to get into detail. So, for example, in the household impact study, just a couple of things. What does intermediate mean? That's kind of the level of information discourse that's presented there. Rather than for beginners or advanced, it's kind of intermediate. And the button that says traditional, or what that means is that it's presented in sort of a study guide way rather than as an interactive link of some kind. So if you want to learn more, you can click obviously on the button Learn More. And there was also a button called Reports, which will take you directly to linked reports for that study. So we have a whole long list of things under these two categories of policy and economics and science and technology. So we've kind of grouped them in that way. And I'm really excited to see that these things are all available in such an easy to locate way. You can spend time just browsing through them, looking for things that you might be interested in. But if you have a specific thing you're looking for, I think you'll be able to find it in the Nerd Corner.
Excellent, Rick. Is there anything else that you were hoping to also highlight with the review of these resources, or anything else on the Nerd Corner? Any other corners?
I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely have plenty of time for exploration, and obviously to have the chance to jump right in with our most esteemed economist. Let's jump into our third research coordinator intro. And Jonathan, I'll let you do a lot more service to your robust background here. But Jonathan joined our department a couple of months ago. He's been with CCL for the better part of a decade. Outside of staff and his active volunteering work, especially for those of you that have been huge fans of the Economics Policy Network, a lot of the white papers, research, and expertise that Jonathan's brought has shown up there for doing analysis for the benefits of volunteers and staff throughout that whole decade. His previous career was as a journalist focused on economics topics with articles published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the San Francisco Chronicle, among many others. And so I will pass it to Jonathan while these photos populate to take it from here and tell us a little bit more about your own background in economics.
Thanks, Brett. And I just have to say, good thing Rick was only half time. Imagine his output if he had been here full time. So anyway, I got my formal economics training at Stanford University, and years later was honored by being invited back to give a departmental seminar on an economics topic relating to consumption inequality. But I did my formal graduate work in American history at Cornell University and University of Sussex. So I've had a variety of interests and have published several books relating more to history and international relations. I left academia to become editor at a national political magazine, where in a foreshadowing of my CCL bipartisanship, I got fan mail from both Milton Friedman and Noam Chomsky. that's probably an unusual combination. Later, I covered economics issues extensively as an editorial writer for the San Jose Mercury News and Oakland Tribune, both then large metro papers in California. And then as economics editor of the San Francisco Chronicle, which was then one of the largest papers in the country, where I wrote hundreds of articles and a weekly column focused on fascinating but largely uncovered academic research relating to important problems that affect all of us with transportation, education, water policy, immigration, and of course, environment and energy. Some of these articles were later republished in economics textbooks. And looking back, my column is really the original Freakonomics, for those of you who are familiar with that. But unfortunately, I failed to see the economic potential in marketing it. So I failed to get rich off of that. Along the way, as Brett mentioned, I also published freelance articles, including some on energy taxes in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and a variety of magazines ranging from, on the left, Mother Jones, to National Review and Reason on the right. So I've tried to straddle a wide variety of ideological platforms. In later years, I also managed corporate communications for the largest power contractor in the United States and for the largest combined gas and electric utility in the US, which pioneered the utility scale procurement of renewable energy. So I have a lot of direct experience in the sectors relevant to CCL. And I joined CCL as a volunteer in either late 2017 or early 2018. Just joined the staff this spring. So it's been a fun ride.
What a journey. This is just so enriching hearing about all three of your backgrounds.
I have to say, Brett, just as by way of explanation, the lower left picture is me sitting in the control room of the nuclear reactor at Hanford, which is one of the first built in the country, where Bechtel was charged with cleaning up a multi-billion-dollar nuclear waste project for the Department of Energy. And the middle picture is me standing with a couple of my local CCL colleagues and George Shultz, who at Hoover Institution, and I'm sure everyone here knows that George Shultz was one of the kind of pioneers of promoting carbon taxes as a means of dealing with the climate crisis. And it gave a great deal of credibility to that position among sort of conservatives and Republicans.
No, thank you so much for that context. So you want to tell us what fun you're having here on the right too before we move on?
There I was contemplating what we have to lose and what we hope to save by enacting national and ultimately global policies to deal with climate before it's too late.
I can see it in your face. And I can also see it in Peter Joseph's face here tonight, tuning in. Thank you so much, Peter, obviously, for that setup with Secretary Shultz.
Peter is head of our Marin chapter and was the one who developed a great personal relationship with George Shultz. And on the right is Bob Archer, who is also with the Marin chapter and was co-founder of the Economics Policy Network, one of our volunteer groups.
Yeah, big shout out to Peter and Bob here too. Well, Jonathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you've been up to and how volunteers can plug into those efforts or benefit from the research you've been doing already?
Sure. Well, as someone who's joined so recently, I don't have a long resume as a CCL staffer, but during my volunteer days, I joined Bob Archer as a co-founder of the Economics Policy Network, which is volunteer run. And we recruited a number of fine professional economists to that network. And I have, in my volunteer days, produced a number of white papers for that site, which are still up there, and deal with carbon taxes and innovation, carbon taxes and regulation, transportation, economic models of carbon taxes, international evidence about the efficacy of carbon taxes, flaws in some of the critiques of carbon taxes made by critics, So I've been very active in contributing new research and kind of research summaries for that network. And all of those papers are available to CCL volunteers and to the broader public. And a number of those papers have now just been brought over to Nerd Corner as well as part of the resources available on the economics and policy page.
Excellent.
As a staffer, among other things, I contributed a blog on a big new study by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Government on how carbon taxes can deal with the climate without boosting the federal deficit. And I also drafted testimony CCL submitted to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee on national security and energy policy in the post-Ukraine age. And I have a number of other papers that are awaiting posting on Nerd Corner and the Economics Policy Network pages.
And I just put a link in the chat where folks can check all those out. Again, just a huge shout out to all of that work as well, Jonathan. Would you mind exploring, kind of walking us through what you're most excited? What corner of Nerd Corner is the corneriest for you?
Sure. Well, as you might guess from my focus on economics, I'm most excited about the economics and policy resources, which Rick pointed to already. And so those include some of the more traditional ones, as well as new material that I think will be much easier for volunteers and the public to access, some of them from the Economics Policy Network pages. So I'm excited to have new links to those resources. And I'm also working on updating some of them with the latest research. So all of us here on the research team are committed to being first serving volunteer needs above all, but also being really timely and up to date on our research. So all of you out there working on this cause can feel that you're supported, that you have solid evidence behind the claims that you're making. So that's, I think, a key driver and motivator, and something I'm very proud. I think we're all proud of that. As Dana mentioned, I'm very excited about the forum, because that's where I think we'll really not only get some of our findings out to fellow volunteers, but stimulate a really fruitful discussion. And I just yesterday posted maybe our first new post on our Nerd Corner forum relating to some of the huge health costs of fossil fuel pollution, which is certainly something that economists have worked on along with public health experts and other authorities. I also just wanted to mention one of the things we're proud of in the research group is a sort of informal peer review process to make sure that the materials that we present to volunteers are really solid. We share all of them before posting them. That's not necessarily true of forum postings, which are more informal, but the more formal resource materials go through careful vetting by all of us with our different expertise and focus. So I think we're bringing you, as I say, carefully vetted material that you can use. And it's both vetted for accuracy, but also for clarity and concision. So we want to do as good a job as we can for your needs.
Excellent. No, I think those are all essential areas to review. Jonathan, is there anything else as far as areas that you are excited about that you wanted to make sure to spotlight before we get to Q&A?
I just want to repeat one set of 4 adjectives that Danny relayed to us when he was outlining his vision of Nerd Corner, which is we want it to be topical, fun, informative, and collaborative. And I think that really sums it up. And it's a challenging but really stimulating assignment to be part of that.
Well, I think all of us can attest to that invite as being all 4 of those categories. And I think for the rest of the time here, we've got basically half of our launch party left to bust out the champagne and ask any questions you might be curious about. So who wants to start us off? I'm looking at the chat. I don't see a backlog of any questions we haven't answered yet. So please feel free. I see Lisa is going to start us off with the party.
Yeah, the big nerd gets going here. I don't even think I can qualify because I'm not smart enough nor have I the background that you guys do. But I do have a question that I've been very curious about. I kind of have been trying to pick people's brains um, gently about and wonder if I could get help. I don't think I'm expecting any kind of response right now, but in the last COP, there was a commitment from over 50 nations to decarbonize their healthcare sector. And the US healthcare sector is responsible for about 8.5% of US emissions. And if it were a country, it would be like the 13th biggest emitter in the world. So one question that I have is how would a price on carbon impact hospital systems? And I have some thoughts about that, but I mean, I don't even know if I took an economics class in college. I can't remember. So it's a question that I think could really make a difference in terms of getting health on board if we had a well-vetted response to that. And, that was, credible and convincing to people who are working in that space. So.
Sounds like the perfect question for the Nerd Corner. I'll pass it over to the research team.
Well, Lisa, you and I have already corresponded some on that, and I couldn't provide you with a detailed brief on that. But in general, studies indicate that the service sector, of which the medical sector is certainly an important part, would face very little impact on their pricing because energy is not actually a major component of their costs. I think, speaking for myself, not for my colleagues, to really dive a whole lot deeper would take an industry expert, probably spending a lot of time and money to microanalyze it. But in general, this is not a sector that's going to face a major cost burden from seeing an increase on taxes on fossil fuels.
Let me put in a few other comments too. I would say that health systems, I'm thinking specifically of hospitals, most of their energy is either in the form of electricity for all the devices that they run and from the typical building energy use, heating, cooling, HVAC, and ventilation, so on. And so transitioning the grid and those particular types of technologies away from fossil fuels will really accelerate under a carbon fee. And so I think that you would see that the impact on that industry would be probably minimal compared to some other industries that have a tougher time decarbonizing.
Yeah,
It's helpful.
Cleaning up the electric grid would be really important because of all the electricity used in healthcare facilities. And also a lot of large healthcare facilities use natural gas heating on the buildings. And so a price on carbon at least give them a little bit of an incentive to transition from natural gas heating to electric heat pumps, which would significantly lower their carbon emissions. So that would at least have some incentivizing effect there.
Oh, that's helpful. And I won't keep you guys any further, but I did put together what I tried to write about, looking at scope 1, 2, and 3, not really knowing anything, but I might run it by you guys and see, if you guys could help frame it and make it more credible. That would be hugely helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect process, like learning by doing example, Lisa, of anything that people have that they're workshopping in the field. That's exactly what we're hoping the forums can provide. So as long as you are willing to, put yourself out there and, say, hey, here's what I'm working on. I really could use your feedback. If it's a short post, obviously the forums directly will be perfect. If it's actually like a file length document, then the files you're more than welcome to upload to. And also just ping people in the forums to say, I've uploaded this here. Anyone that has the time, that's really that element of, informal, but still the importance of peer review that I think we're really hoping to be able to provide with Nerd Corner. So thank you for providing such a natural example of exactly that concept. I see Ernest.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Always a pleasure. I see Ernest's hand, and then a couple of questions from Paul and David. So Ernest, why don't you go first, and then we'll take these next two in the chat.
Hi everyone, and thanks for all your work. I was actually going to ask a question. There was one. This might be relevant to Lisa's question as well. A few years back, there was this study by REMI or REMI on this, and it's on the CCL website about the impacts of the carbon fee and dividend in terms of decarbonization and on various industries and regions. And I wondered if that might actually have some of the information that Lisa's looking for about healthcare sector in the US anyway. And the reason I was thinking about that report anyway is actually I had a question for you guys, which is that study sort of showed that, a carbon fee and dividend could reduce emissions in the US by, 50%, I think, if I recall correctly, by like 2035. And that's a pretty big number. I wondered if you had looked at, or someone had looked at, what if you add in the carbon border adjustment to that? The impact presumably is bigger at a global level, and I don't know how you would even get that number, but I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, or if you know about it. So if I think about, 50% of US emissions, that's like 3 gigatons, right? So
yeah. I can speak a little bit to that. The REMI study is a little bit out of date, and we've actually seen that some of the other more rigorous modeling that's been done by others has shown even larger emission reductions. One thing that the REMI study did, though, that was very useful was it broke down the impact on employment in different industries and the impact on specific sectors. And so that's where you might see some of that information that you're looking for. So, yeah, we definitely still have respect for the REMI study. Oh, and your question though about border adjustments, the REMI study made an assumption that there would be no impact on trade. And that was, we found that some of the other economists had found that not as credible as we had hoped. And so some of the other economic studies that have been done have perhaps done a better job of taking that into account. Anything more on that, Jonathan?
I would just say I just took a quick peek at the REMI study, and for Lisa's benefit, it shows increased employment in healthcare resulting, I think, because of increased household demand for healthcare services resulting from the dividend. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that, but I think it's like people arguing over whether carbon taxes are going to make a tiny reduction in GDP or a tiny increase in GDP. Different models will say different things. You'll never be able to, in the real world, measure it because they're too small, which is good news, actually. The healthcare industry doesn't need to worry about this because the impacts are going to be small relative to lots of other things going on out there. But yes, you should definitely take a look at the REMI study. It's not perfect, but it is pretty good at breaking down all the different industry sectors, and I think will provide some credibility for your case.
Let's go to the chat here then, if that's all right. We've got a couple of great questions. One specifically from Paul about the price of energy skyrocketing this year, including natural gas, gasoline, and diesel. These price increases are way ahead of the increases we would have had seen with the Energy Innovation Act, assuming 100% pass-through costs. Are we seeing the reduction in fossil fuel use that we would have expected with the carbon price?
I'd say it's way too soon. Exactly. No serious economist is going to declare victory or something after a few months. Anecdotally, one of the things I'm interested in and plan to write about is a huge surge in demand for electric vehicles taking place in the US and globally. Now, there may be lots of reasons, some of which include strong national policies, especially in Europe, to promote purchases of EVs, but there's no question, just loads of media stories indicate buyer interest is soaring. Google searches have soared because of the increase in gasoline prices. So, and finally, economic studies, serious ones over a long period, show that fuel prices do have a market impact on demand for EVs. So I'd say this anecdotal evidence is fully in line with what we would expect from serious economic studies.
There's also a factor called the anticipation effect that economists talk about, where the fact that price spikes are transitory, and especially when you hear from politicians that we're going to do everything we can to reduce those prices, people don't expect them to last. Whereas under a carbon tax, it would be a completely different situation. People would know what's coming in terms of at least that element of fuel prices. And I think you will see, we'll probably by the end of this year, we'll see some data on how emissions have been affected by those prices.
Excellent, excellent points. And again, for all of these follow-ups, please continue to use the corner. Tonight is really a jumping off point to just even go deeper. And I know even in the chat here with some of the expertise that we have on the call, obviously, Paul, thanks for sharing your wisdom and perspectives here too. Again, the benefit of the Nerd Corner is not just that it's a one-way funnel of information, but it's a community of learning together. So please feel free to, obviously, as other people post questions, this community of scholars can, add, amplify, and deepen the understanding that we're sharing together. Here's a question about from Kevin O'Neill about different frames for carbon pricing outside of just a steadily rising approach. If anyone wants to specifically speak to, if you're familiar with any other designs, like the price is a ratchet. So if fossil fuel prices go up and down because of market dynamics, the fee then would be imposed when the price of fossil fuels is dropping from a peak. Then it would be less painful, and it might be accepted as a way of discouraging future price spikes. Does anyone want to speak to that question a little bit more and your familiarity with research behind it?
I know that with regard to gasoline prices, proposals have been made, including by economists at the University of California Energy Institute, to set a sort of market price. I think this is what he was getting at here. Let's say pre-Ukraine, back when $4 a gallon was considered still reasonably high. If the market price fell below that, the difference would be collected as a tax. And if the market price started moving closer to $4, the tax collection would decline, but the benefit would be consumers, wouldn't face higher prices as the market price went up. So there'd be less consumer resistance. And then you'd have a fairly stable gasoline price, hopefully higher than the average market price. So you would discourage gasoline consumption. I think the current swings that we've seen would have swamped any such policy. And I don't see a lot of serious consideration for policies like that.
Yeah, I would think that this would be an absolute nightmare for program administrators trying to figure out how not to create a resonance effect where you reduce the fuel tax and then the price drops and then there's a price spike and you're trying to chase after this these market changes and you can never get them in sync.
Who else has thoughts or questions? We definitely have a lot of, Kevin says, thanks there in the chat, a lot of angles and places to go. So feel free, especially if you haven't asked anything yet. I see one last one in the chat here from Dave about the Congressional Management Foundation. And then we can go to the phones again if anyone wants to unmute or raise your hand to get in the queue. But Dave specifically asked this great question. I think it kind of details the fact that right now, Danny's review at the very beginning, and what we've spoken to afterwards, the Nerd Corner is really focused on those 4 core topics of science, technology, policy, and economics. What about just the overall idea of citizen advocacy, citizen lobbyists? Are there other thoughts or places that people can go or point to outside of the Congressional Management Foundation, which we've deeply benefited from, had a partnership for with years, particularly concerning that efficacy of CCL's approach?
That's a great question, I think, and it's not one probably that we're focused on. I did address some issues, just a matter of personal interest to me, what the literature that I follow on carbon taxes is saying about public opinion and public acceptance, which I think will be an ongoing topic that we will address on Nerd Corner. And I looked at some of the literature on that in a paper, which is part of the resources on the case against some carbon tax critics. Those who claim that we'll never get carbon taxes through, I liken them to people who said, well, we would never get women's suffrage or civil rights or a lot of other things passed. But when you had large citizen movements, they can make a difference. It's hard to do. There's no guarantee. A lot of them fail. But I think CCL is a great example of one that has real potential, which is why we're all on this call together, because we believe in that possibility. And so I cited just a teeny bit of the literature on all of that, but that's a great and big topic for other people than probably than myself to delve into.
Yeah, there was also a recent paper led by Francis Mort UC Davis, who's a good climate economist, and I'm writing about right now, actually, that trying to incorporate a bunch of kind of social, political, technological feedbacks into climate models to figure out like which future emissions pathways are the most likely. And so one of those feedbacks was sort of a lobbying feedback, although it was more of a sort of a utility or a industry feedback or industry lobbying feedback, and not a citizen lobbying feedback. And the other one that's relevant is like a public opinion feedback, which that's more relevant to CCL. Although I was talking to her about it today, and they didn't include like a direct citizen lobbying of members of Congress feedback. So it's definitely an area that it's getting more attention in the research community, but I think they got a little ways to go to incorporate that into modeling, but they're starting to move in that direction. It's pretty interesting.
Could you put a link to that study in the chat?
Sure, and I will actually,
term?
I'll put a link to it. I'll also have a CCL blog post about it in a week or two.
Oh, great.
And a Yale piece too, but I'll try to find that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to speak directly to Paul's observation about the connection today with gas prices being so high, and yet again, the actual gas stations are open with no lines for fuel compared to the 1970s fuel shortage with lines, and what the cases may be different between those two scenarios?
No, there's no, the problem is not a shortage right now. It's just high prices. And we have such a different type of technological mix in transportation than we did back in the 70s. For one thing, those of us that are elderly enough to remember typical personal cars back in the 70s, you'd be doing really good if you were getting 18 miles a gallon. And nowadays, I think the average in the US is somewhere around 25, and that it includes all the SUVs and trucks that we have now. So it's a different situation.
Yeah, I mean, supplies were reduced because demand cratered during COVID lockdowns. And then, it took them, the oil and gas companies have taken a while to get the production up and running again. And then they're kind of resistant to increasing their production too much, because then if demand goes down in the long term, then they've got all this production that makes costs go or prices go down and reduces their profits. And so there's a lot of complicating factors there. Whereas in the 70s, it was just the supply was not there.
Excellent. Who wants to take us home? We've got time for at least one or two questions. If you've been sitting on one, we'd love to have the chance to just hear your thoughts, reflections, feedback overall in the Nerd Corner. You name it. We're here for you.
Yeah, Brett, Peter Joseph here.
Go for it, Peter.
How is Danny doing? Is he sick?
Well, I can't speak for Danny's behalf, but he does seem to be rebounding well. I think he cratered mostly in Monday's time frame and is gaining energy back. So I don't think it's too serious of the symptoms. But I do know that it was, something to push through, and definitely impacted him more than I think he anticipated.
Yeah, and the video that he recorded was done, I guess, yesterday or today. So you could see that he's he's his old self pretty much, soldiering on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Obviously, I think you're naming the concern we're all feeling here. So, Danny, if you listen to this live stream, know we're rooting for your speedy recovery, along with anyone else that may be impacted right now.
I see Catherine raising her hand.
Yeah, go for it, Catherine. I was just going there.
Has there been any attempt to quantify the trade-off between the carbon emissions that we would produce, I'm in Seattle, produce in flying to the June conference versus the quantifying the good that we could do by being there?
I think every year we get that question, and I think it really comes down to a personal choice. CCL by all means wants you to be empowered to not have a big carbon footprint, and especially this year and other years, when there's an online component, if that meets the circumstances best for you, then absolutely know that's going to be an option. And also know that I think there's an FAQ in the conference page. I can dig this up too, with some recommendations. Should you actually attend in person, what some of the most reputable offset programs are that Dr. Hayhoe and others recommend for those that do fly more often, to try to at least do some part of offsetting their footprint.
Okay. Thanks. On the registration page, right? It's
Yeah, I
linked
can
from
track
the
this down
registration.
for you. Yeah, if you go to the FAQ section.
Okay, thanks.
It's really hard to quantify the good that we could do. It all depends on what we can enforce to happen. And we don't know what the counterfactual will be if we didn't do this. So
The best solution is to bicycle to DC.
Yeah.
we had a couple of people, Chicago folks did that back in 2019 or 2018, I think.
My co-leader of the environmental justice action team takes the train every time she goes from California. So
As does Tony, I know. Yeah, there's definitely other options. My first CCL conference back in 2011, I took the megabus from Minneapolis. So you can definitely find planes, trains, and automobiles if flying's not your bag.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for naming that. Definitely, obviously, want to make that connection, Catherine. So, Luis, why don't we use your question as the last one? I see that, yes, so Kevin, there is a virtual option. Stay tuned. It will be available on that same conference registration page I'll put to in a little bit. But Luis has this question for our team, and this will be our last question for tonight about methane leakage. Measurement of leakage of methane during drilling, transmission, and storage of natural gas has been spotty, but more and more we are hearing that the leakage makes use of fossil gas as bad as coal. Should we be pushing for better measurements of leakage? Rick, I'm going to tee you up because I know you gave a CCU on this earlier this year, but obviously Dana and Jonathan, feel free to add to it.
Yeah, I would say that the meme that or the talking point you hear that natural gas is worse than coal is false, basically, because there's a misunderstanding about the efficiency of power plants. It's not, but and the leakage is probably nowhere near what you've heard from some critics. But still, that should be mitigated, and there are ways to do it. And there is a federal regulatory policy to do that that's been reinstated by the Biden administration, and it should be kicking in this year. Because the leaks can be fixed. It just takes money, and they have to incentivize the producers to actually spend that money.
Yeah, we're getting some more sensitive instruments going up on satellites in the next year or so. That are going to be able to measure very closely where big methane leaks are coming from. And there do seem to be some really big sources, like there's something like Russia, and actually Turkmenistan turns out to be a big one, and the US has some pretty big ones too. So yeah, it's something we need more data on. These more sensitive instruments are going to be really useful in like pinpointing where methane leaks are coming from, and then it's a matter of actually stopping the leaks to reduce that big impact.
And I would add that in addition to the technical question of how big the leaks are and how to spot them, is the policy question of what to do about them, regulation versus some proposals for a tax on methane emissions. And that's actually a salient topic right now in the congressional discussion. So stay tuned. We'll probably hear some discussions on our forum about that over time.
Yes, please. The more the merrier. And that is just a perfect example again to take us home here. So I put in the chat as well as what we're featuring on the slide where you can go cclusa.org/nerd-corner to continue to engage and pass on any questions or give feedback from your own experience. Again, for all ahead, we'll make sure to keep that page posted with the most relevant and timely news, information, chart of the week, discussion forums, and resources for you in your advocacy. And again, tonight, I'd like to close by just thanking Danny, Jonathan, Dana, Rick. Thank you all so much for being here online. And I'm going to unmute so that we can join myself in giving a big round of applause to our research team. Thank you all so much for being here.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
You all.
Be safe out there. Good work, team.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you,
My
Brett.
honor.
Nice hosting. Good Danny impression.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you, guys. Stay safe. Thank you, Dana.